Hello guys, and welcome in to another beginner-friendly coverage of trials here in the Elder Scrolls Online. Today we're going to be talking about Halls of Fabrication. This one definitely has a lot of different parts going on, and depending on your group and their experience with it, your personal experience in this trial can vary. So for this one in particular, while I am going to be covering different points of view for solo tank, off tank, healer, and damage dealer, I'm going to highly recommend that you watch all 4 versions, mainly because it seems like every group that goes in here handles things a little bit differently. So having some more points of view on how potentially your different takes or group members are going to react to this trial is going to be very helpful. And again, this is for normal difficulty of Halls of Fabrication in 2024. There are many mechanics that can just be flat out skipped, a lot of things that aren't that big of a deal, but my coverage is going to give you basically a primer if you've either never been here before or you saw things happening and you didn't know why your fellow teammates were doing things a certain way. And I also ran all of these trials with mainly pickup groups or pug groups. So the quality of the runs vary, but I think this gives the most authentic experience for the different type of situations you might see when entering this trial. So without further ado, the first point of view that I'm going to cover is going to be the solo tank point of view. If you decide to solo tank this trial, my best advice is to keep control of the group. You're the tank, you're the one leading the charge. When you first run into Halls of Fabrication, many people do what is called a big pull. My version of big pull is going to be 2 medium-sized pulls. The first one's going to be getting up to this room with the spheres. You're going to taunt the first 3 spheres and hide behind this mushroom. And if you look, there's 3 little flowers that you want to stand in between. It's the perfect spot. As soon as the last of these 3 spheres dies, another 4 spheres spawn. You want to taunt all 4 of those and again go back to that spot between the 3 flowers. Once you are progressing to the second, quote, big pull spot, you're going to run past the Kagudi and the spheres, but taunting the 2 spheres at the top of the hill. Run down to where the 3 spheres are down below, but before you jump off that ledge. If you jump off that ledge, you've gone too far, and it's advised to kill the enemies above the ledge before you jump down, or else you're going to be locked in combat and trying to kill them while standing on the ledge. It gets a little tedious. You then get this pack of 3 enemies right here, where if you taunt all 3 of them and quickly, so you want to use a ranged taunt and be taunting them as you're running to get behind in this hide spot. If you taunt all 3 of them and then hop behind this pole, they'll all stack right in front of you, making them easy killing for your DPS. And that is the first trash packs leading up to the first boss. Now, for the first boss, you need to make sure to taunt both of the big, as we lovingly call them, chickens. You need to make sure to taunt both the chickens, and there's a couple key attacks you need to look out for. Number 1, where they wind up a big, quote, heavy, you need to make sure to block that so that you do not get thrown onto your butt. If you do get thrown onto your butt, you cannot break free. You have to have somebody else bash one of the chickens that's holding you down in order to get back up. So this can be fairly deadly, especially if it pairs with the other key mechanic to look out for, which I call the lightning puddles. These lightning puddles just spawn underneath whoever has aggro of the boss. That'd be you as the solo tank. And even on normal, you're going to want to move out of these puddles. Try to navigate yourself in an arc around your damage dealer group and don't kite away through the room. The fight should go fast enough that you only need to lay 3 of them, but if you've laid your 3rd, move back to that first starting position and then do the arc again, if the fight keeps progressing long enough for you to have to do that. After the first boss, the second boss is going to be in this room also. There's going to be 2 spheres and 2 Kagudis in this room. Getting them stacked is rather tricky solo, so I tried, but it didn't really work. And then this leads us into the second boss. With the second boss, the main name of the game here is hold the boss still, block his heavy attacks. Whenever the Centurions spawn, you're going to want to make sure to get those taunted so that they run towards you and then die in cleave. And then other than that, there's one last main thing from this boss. It's called Tank Game. The boss is going to disappear for a moment, and then he's going to reappear, making you kneel down, and there are going to be 4 shadow versions around you. You need to block and face the version that becomes opaque. If you don't, then it's gonna send a gust of air that slaps all of your teammates. You'll be fine, but it slaps and knocks back all your teammates, so it's less than optimal. And then also during this tank game, it's very important that you do not move your feet. Even if you don't end up facing the right direction and you don't block it correctly, do not leave this little green circle. If you do, you will automatically die, even on normal. And after second boss, you get put right into the area for the third boss. Key thing about this third boss is whenever you get teleported up, my best advice is to not run left or right, just go straight forward until all of your teammates are there. People are going to run through this area and stack all these spiders on this one octagon right here. Now, easier said than done. If you have a pug group, no clue if they're going to run around, if they're going to end up going the wrong way. The best thing I can advise is, especially when you're running with a pickup group, is to slot a self-heal. And as a solo tank, don't worry about getting all of these spiders taunted. That is not our main goal. Theoretically, we want them dead before the boss spawns. And again, the key is to try to get down most of these small spiders before starting the big boss spider fight. One thing you can do as main and only tank during this fight, while you don't actually need to taunt the spider in order to make sure it doesn't hit anybody else, typically you as the tank would be the one to start this pull by walking over to the spider and attacking it to get it to start walking. But as you can see in this video, somebody else had already run by and gotten the pull started. So the important thing is to just make sure that that pylon gets pulled before the boss reaches that section. You're probably going to need 1, maybe 2 pylons in order to complete the fight. That's what I see in most groups, if not only 1 pylon. After that first pylon, the boss is going to walk forward. There is going to be 1 humanoid enemy that you, as the only tank, will need to make sure to taunt and pull to the second pylon location. An important thing of note, and this is especially a good example of it here, if somebody dies in this room, because there can be a rogue spider or 2 that is still alive at the end of it, you might need to go back and manually resurrect that person because they might be stuck in combat. And we see that they're up, but they're in ghost form, so make sure they get the loot from their bot chests, and we can rock and roll. And once you make sure all your teammates are alive and people have gotten through the door, you can start the next trash pulls. An important thing of note is if you are not the tank, don't lead the charge because it leads to messes like this, where everybody died. So this is a really great example of make sure to let your tank lead with taunting and trying to get things stacked and grouped up. And as a tank, generally try to hold adds here in the center of the octagons. This is the safest location for you and your DPS to be in these rooms. So just taunt and hold the enemies generally in here, and you're going to have a couple different types of enemies. You're going to have both melee and ranged. The melee ones are going to be your ones with swords, but the key ones are going to be what I call the Mega Man hands guys, or capacitors, as is their official name, are typically not going to stay in group, and as the only tank, just do the best you can to make sure they're taunted, but at this point, with enough Oaken Soul, heavy attack builds, or Arcanist, they die plenty fast. Another thing of note in these rooms with the lightning going across is that the lightning slows and also steals your magicka. So just be aware of that. You might be low on magicka, so don't be afraid to drink some potions during these trash pulls. One thing I advise is killing this 1 Centurion first before going down to the rest of the pool. just to try to keep it a little more controlled, especially if you aren't as confident in your damage dealer's group damage. After killing that first Centurion, you should get 3 spheres, and then you'll have those few humanoids. And then after killing the second Centurion, you should get 4 more spheres after that. And another little thing you can do as the only tank here is once you got your spheres taunted, pulling them behind this little trash pool here, kind of midway down this hill but before the door. And if you break the line of sight of the spheres, it'll force them to roll forward so long as they're not channeling their attack. And once they're all in position, just go help with debuffing and finishing up the last of these enemies. After that, we have what is lovingly called the Triplets boss. On the Triplets boss, as the only tank, you really need to make sure to taunt the left and the right enemy. The left and the right enemy are the only 2 that will go out and really attack your teammates. But another thing of note, the guy in the middle, the third that mixes a triplet, will have a lightning circle around him. Do not get too close to the guy in the middle, but do try to stack the guy on the left and the guy on the right close to the middlemost boss so that your damage dealers can cleave all 3 at the same time. Do make sure that you watch the heavy attacks on those, I'm going to call them side bosses, and they'll be on the same timer. So you'll be receiving a heavy attack at the same time from both enemies, so make sure you're at full health, shielded, and blocking whenever those come through, because on normal, those can wreck your world, or potentially knock you back into damage that you don't want to take in addition to that heavy attack. And after that, we're just going to have a few of these hallways with, again, we're going to have those melee two-handers or dagger enemies, and the Mega Man hands or capacitor enemies that you just do your best to taunt, get them grouped in the center of these octagons so that your DPS aren't being kited to stand in places that are bad for their health, and just do your best to debuff and assist the team as needed. One cool little spot you can do here, in this pool that's gonna have 3 enemies standing in the water. If you get all 3 taunted quickly, and then run up to this rightmost cubby right past the water, most of the enemies should get stacked. Another one is if you get all 6 of these taunted and then you go hide in this little corner right here, all 6 of those enemies will stack very nicely, including the capacitors. So it makes for a very, very convenient pull. Alright, and now for last boss. You, as the only tank with taunt, is going to be very, very important that you stay on this boss's toes. Do not be hanging out anywhere else. When the boss is on one of these 4 directions, you need to be on his toes. If you're too far away, the boss is going to do a jump. And then if you're too far away again, he's going to jump. And then if he jumps a 3rd time within 1 boss fight, it's an automatic wipe for the whole team, even on normal. So you need to make sure that you are on this boss's toes. If you have allies on both arms, both the fire and the blade arm, you take less damage because those arms are being, quote, kited to do their damage up on the sides instead of on you, along with the stomps and everything else going on in the, quote, trench. So again, whenever you run in, you're going to want to make sure that you have allies on both sides, taunt his toes and stand right up on them. Another thing of note is don't go behind the boss. If you notice there's this green fog, that can and will kill you even on normal. And on the right foot, you want to make sure to try to block that or else it's going to stagger you. So right foot stomp, you need to block. So just stay on his toes and wait for him to walk to the middle. Once he walks to the middle, stop doing damage on him. Work on getting these ads taunted. We're going to have a couple 2-leggers, and then the spheres are the main focus for dealing damage. But the biggest thing is get those 2-leggers taunted, kite them on top of the spheres while your damage dealers are focusing on killing these terminals, spheres, little guys. You can help with rezzing allies, and going in to execute, give this boss the best debuffs that you can provide, any ultimates you have, and finish out the fight strong. And that concludes the main solo tank point of view for Halls of Fabrication. Alrighty, now to talk about the off-tank point of view for tanking in Halls of Fabrication. The best advice I can give for off-tanking in Halls of Fabrication, as far as whenever in this situation where you have two tanks and you're off-tank, the reason I'm not covering the main tank point of view is because it's going to look a lot like the solo tank point of view. The only thing that's going to differ is such as in this situation, I'm going to communicate with my main tank as to which enemy packs I'm going to be grabbing and getting grouped up. And with that, the trash packs look a lot the same. Many people run past these first trash packs all the way up to this open area where there's the dead Centurion. I've agreed with my tank that I'm taunting the ones on the right. We're stacking in between the three flowers until these guys get stacked. Once the last one has gone down, I've agreed that I'm going to taunt the ones on the left, so having voice comms or just writing out beforehand helps out with communication on this. But when in doubt, if you see something that's not taunted, taunt it and then rock and roll. And on this pool, I've agreed to taunt the two at the top of the hill and they've gotten the three down below once they're all stacked. My other tank has wanted to grab the taunt on these three. I'm assisting by bashing them if they start channeling so that they'll keep moving, but for some reason they didn't quite stack right, which happens. You can see if we are locked in combat with one little thing, that's why I recommend doing the trash pools before the first boss in a couple stages to make sure you don't leave any stragglers. For the first boss, we're actually going to split up the chickens since there are two of us. And generally, because these are pug groups and not super organized, if you're a damage dealer that happens to have two tanks, just keep an eye on the health pool of your chickens and try to keep them evened out so that they die about the same time. On this trash pool, it's a little more possible to get the spheres to stack, but again, not super required. It's only two spheres and two Kagooties, not that big of a deal. Biggest thing here as off tank, make sure you do not taunt the big second boss. Just taunt the Centurions, get them dragged in, work on buffing and debuffing. Watch your tank for tank game. If they mess it up, then take over taunting, but otherwise you kind of get to chill out for the most part here. And whenever there is that rain lightning that you see that starts making a lot of lightning puddles in group, do walk out of that and then come back to stack on the boss's butt after that phase is over. The biggest thing is to not kite those on top of your main tank. After you get done with the second boss up in this spider room, you and your other tank can determine who's going left, who's going right to kite the spiders to the kill spot. In this example, I've decided to go left along with the rest of the team, and my other tank has gone right to get the spiders kited. And again, we're not trying to taunt everything, we're just making our way to the kill location, which is the octagon right before the boss. And we just wait here, kill most if not all the spiders, and then we wait at first pylon. Our tank is going to go up there and introduce himself to the spider. Once he starts getting close enough, we can press E to activate the pylon, use our ultimates, help with debuffing. We can go ahead and grab this two-legger, if that is what you and your tank have agreed upon, and pull it to the second pylon location. Once he starts getting close enough, we can press E to activate the pylon. Now for these upcoming trash pools, lightning going across the walkways are going to snare you and drain your magicka, and that's just part of this trial, so just be aware of that. And make sure you drink potions to keep your magicka up. As the off tank in this group, I have decided to grab the capacitors, or again those guys that have the Mega Man hands, and to get them to stack in the center of these octagons, I'm range taunting and then kiting past group to get them to stack here in the middle, so that the DPS have an easier job killing them. Here, we're again going to kill the one Centurion. I'm letting my other tank handle that. If the spheres spawn, I was going to taunt them, but they didn't. So instead, we're just going to hold these here. And then once this Centurion is down, I'm going to taunt the spheres that spawn from up here. I'm going to try to run down to that hide spot and hold. Most of them got here. Looks like a few of them started channeling before they made it down. But in the end, we got most of them down, or they died before they could get there. Also acceptable. On this boss fight, we are going to keep, again, all three of them stacked together. Don't stand too close to the guy in the middle. But now you'll only have one heavy at a time on ya. The key thing is, if you noticed, I'm trying to kite mine to stand on top of the other two, which means you'll probably end up stacking with your other tank, but watch that lightning AoE around the center boss. That'll kill even a tank on normal, so make sure to respect it. Nothing else much of note on these pulls. Again, I'm going for the capacitors. I'm running past group and trying to get them stacked with the rest. So this is where having two tanks can make trash go a little bit faster by being able to kite those annoying little capacitors into group. And sometimes there aren't any spots really to kite them or break their line of sight, so just do your best. And on this one, I'm specifically letting my other tank handle all three, and I'm just helping if there's any bashes and to help with debuffing. Both tanks end up in that Heidi spot, but I see I have my couple capacitors I could get in order to break their line of sight, and the group did an excellent job burning these down. And for the last boss, as the off tank, it's going to be very important that you do not taunt the boss, because as the off tank, you're going to be on the blade arm, and if you grab taunt of the boss while you're up on this arm, that counts as being too far away, and that could cause him to do that jump, and if he jumps 3 times within one fight, it will cause a wipe of the group. So very important that you do not taunt the boss. You just stand up on this left side and look pretty. Until across the way, there's going to be another Mega Man hand guys that spawn. So you're going to want to range taunt those whenever they appear. Don't hop down too early, and then you kind of stand halfway on this ramp, and it perfectly kites the Mega Man hand guys, the capacitors, to stack right on top of the terminal. You stand halfway on this ramp. So again, it's one ranged taunt while you're still up on the platform, and then you stand halfway down on your ramp, and the capacitors will perfectly stack where the terminal spawns. After this, because you're the off tank and there's not a whole lot going on, you're gonna help with debuffing, catching any reses that need caught, and just generally helping out as you see fit. And sometimes people will join over onto your side. No problem, doesn't hurt anything. And make sure when you're going up on your arm that you are not being too slow, because if you're too slow, you'll get killed by the gas, even on normal. And also that lightning puddle, make sure to give it plenty of space and respect it. And with that, that is how you off tank in Halls of Fabrication. Alrighty, now for the healer point of view. For this point of view, my best advice is to first identify who your tank or tanks are in the group and focus your heals and efforts towards that individual. When running with a pickup group as a healer, let your tank set the pace. If there's a rogue DPS that runs ahead of your tank and dies, not your fault, not your problem. Stick with your tank and let them set the pace and do your best to support them. And if your group is near you and the tank, then the rest of the team will get everything else they need from you as a healer. Now you see on this pull, my tank is doing an absolutely massive pull. One thing you can do as a healer to help out is to bash the spheres so that they keep moving down the hill. But other than that, just generally follow the pack and see where they go. And before you jump down, like you see here, a lot of my teammates missed that there was one little Nyx Ox keeping us in combat. So make sure everything is dead before you hop down to that lower area. For the first boss, the best thing you can do, especially if you only have one tank, is to just keep an eye on them and watch for a couple things. Number one, if they take an unblocked heavy attack, the chicken will sit on top of the tank and you can help by bashing them and that will get them off. Additionally, if your tank is not very fast-footed, you might need to apply some extra heals underneath them if they don't get out of the lightning AoEs quickly. So just keep an eye out for these. And then your sticky heals, radiating regeneration, echoing vigor, should be enough heals for the rest of your allies, but your main heals should be focused on your tank. And just watch your own toes that you aren't standing in any obvious lightning puddles. For the second boss, there are a couple key things. First is going to be whenever the boss turns around and does that cone slap, you're going to want to step out of that. It's very easy, it's very telegraphed, and it prevents you from taking damage and getting interrupted. So just step out of it. Whenever the Centurion wakes up and it's either the spinning one or the steam one, the best thing you can do as a healer is just stay still and commit to that position. DPS burn them down fast enough that there's no need to panic and run away. Just keep your AoE heals stationary to heal through any damage from the Centurions. And whenever you have the lightning puddles that fall from the sky and they target many different players, try to step out of those. There's going to be 3 of them, and then go back to stacking on the boss's butt. As you see here, people who get too far away from the boss will jump to them, even if the tank has aggro. The boss will jump to whoever is the farthest away, lay a lightning puddle, and then go back to whoever has aggro. To prevent these lightning puddles from even spawning, just stay stacked on the boss's butt. Now, for the next boss, just follow the pace of your tank, whether they want to kill spiders individually or they want to do a big pull. At this point, most people do a big pull. One thing of note while you're walking through this, keep your ground heals down as the team is moving, especially through areas where there's a couple different blades. But the biggest thing is keep up your sticky heals, your radiating regens on players. Generally, you'll have one healer in the front of the pack and one healer in the back of the pack, but if there's no clear communication on who's going where, then just improv and hang out somewhere near the middle where you can heal the most people. Once the boss fight actually starts, if nobody else touches it, when the spider is approaching the pylons, it's going to be very important that you hit the button. You don't want to hit it too early because that lightning line across, which is what disrupts the shield off of the spider boss, only persists for a few seconds. So you want to time it to whenever it's close, but you want to also make sure you don't hit it too late that the spider has already walked by. So if you don't see anybody else going forward, hit the pylon, which is just the interact button. From there, this is where you would want to time your ultimates and damage while the spider is down. As soon as the spider gets back up, you want to run ahead of it and get to the second pylon location. Once there, again, summon the lightning across the walkway, which will stun and make the spider boss vulnerable again. You try to buff on your allies them as much as you can before the spider is vulnerable. Now for these upcoming trash pulls, the biggest thing as a healer you're going to notice every time you touch one of these lightning lines is that it's going to drain your magicka. So just be aware you're going to need to do extra heavy attacks in order to get some magicka back. Also consider doing some extra stamina skills like echoing vigor, and try to not stand in the blades so that you don't build up stacks of bleed damage. Again, we're just letting our tank set the pace on how big of a pull they want to do. We follow our tank's lead and put our best ground-based heals and combat prayers aimed such that they are always hitting our tank, especially since we only have one in this particular instance. Again, another thing you can do as a healer is once you see that the spheres are out, bash them to keep them moving while the tank is trying to stack them, but sometimes they still don't really like to move properly. Alright, now for the triplets boss. The best advice, especially if you only have one tank, is to, number 1, you need to make sure to stay alive. Do not get in the lightning circle around the middlemost of the triplets. And number 2, again, put your best heals so that they're hitting your tank at all times, and hope that your tank blocks. If your tank doesn't block attacks, there's not a whole lot you can do as a healer, especially in a situation where you only have one tank and both of those heavies happen at the same time. There's no amount of healing that's going to prevent your tank from dying to that. But even if they do block it, they still take a bit of damage, so just keep them topped off on heals and also throw some extra synergies their way for resources, such as the Undaunted Orb, have an altar out, or anything else you can provide that helps with resources for them. And the next trash pulls are not very notable, at least for the healer. Again, keep up your sticky heals at all times on players, seeing as how every time they so much as brush through these blades, they're going to be taking a bleed debuff, not even including any damage from the mobs. One thing that's going to be slightly different in these upcoming rooms is the water that has lightning acts just like the lightning going across the walkways. It is going to drain your magicka and deal damage to you. So just keep that in mind and throw in a couple extra heavy attacks here and there and drink your potions. Always let your tank lead the charge. Every tank is going to pull this a little bit differently, and on normal, it's fine. You just figure it out as you go along. All right, now for last boss. On this one, again, because we don't have an off tank, I offered to stand on the left arm, which you only ever need one person up there, and I offered to do it so that the tank was not affected by the blade arm. Everyone else is gonna go over on the firearm or right arm whenever you're looking at the boss, and just do your best to send synergies and heals down to your tank. And as far as whenever the boss walks to the center, as always, do not attack the boss in the center. Anything you hit him with will hit you back harder. So do not hit the boss while he's in the middle, and get up on your arms promptly. If you notice, as soon as the boss is standing up, you have a brief moment to dodge roll back behind him and go up the ramp behind him to efficiently get up on your arm spot. But you have to time this correctly for as soon as the last sphere or terminal is killed. And again, if you have any sticky damage left on the boss, that will also be reflected back to you whenever he's in the center. So again, try to only place one sticky damage whenever he first appears at the end of these channels or trenches, and then don't reapply. The reflected damage is not as strong as it is on harder difficulties, but it's still significant enough that, as you saw earlier on, especially for a damage dealer that's able to output a lot of damage, and then that's reflected back, it did kill them. So just keep that in mind. And for this last section, you want to hold your ultimates until you get to the middle, and then once all your damage dealers are here, throw your ulti and rock and roll. Alrighty, now let's talk about the last point of view for Halls of Fabrication, which is going to be damage dealer. As a damage dealer, it's important to let your tank lead the charge and set the pace of the pulls. This means if your tank wants to do a huge pull, you just follow their lead and try to keep up. Or if you have a tank like I have in this situation, where they like to do small pulls of each enemy encounter, that's fine. Let them set the pace that they are most comfortable with. As far as kill priority in these first few trash packs, there is nothing of note. Just if you see a sphere channeling, do bash them, but other than that, just keep pace with the tank and kill the enemies that you see. For the first boss fight that I call chickens, in this situation we had one solo tank, so both of the chickens are going to be stacked together. If you instead had a situation where you had two tanks, preferably the damage dealers would divide between the two bosses. There's a couple things to keep an eye out for. If your tank misses a heavy attack from the boss and becomes pinned, which is going to have that channeled effect radiating around the boss, please make sure to bash the boss so that it gets off the tank. Another thing of note, don't stack up too tightly behind the bosses, because they will lay a lightning AoE underneath whoever has aggro, therefore the tank, and you want to make sure that you, as a squishy damage dealer, don't get stuck in that damage. After that, we have the second boss. For the second boss, a lot of my tips are going to sound a lot like the healers. Stay stacked behind this boss as closely as you can, so as to prevent him from number one, jumping away to whoever is the furthest away, so it keeps him close to us so we can do more damage. And number two, whenever he does this jump, it lays a lightning puddle in the room that just is excessive damage going out to players that can be prevented. Also, whenever the boss turns around and targets this conal attack on one random player, because you're stacked up close to the boss, it's easy to step out of it. It's very telegraphed. Pay attention to that. Making sure your damage is hitting both the centurions and the boss to make sure they go down. And whenever you see this mechanic I call lightning rain, where there is going to be a lightning puddle targeted to multiple players, you just step slightly away to kite them. There's going to be 3 of them. Once the third one has landed, then you get back onto the boss's butt. After the second boss, we then head off to the room for the third boss. In this room, there are going to be lots of blades and lots of enemies. Number 1, if you can, do not walk in the blades. The longer that you're in the blades, the more stacks of bleed damage that you're going to take. So if there's an option, don't walk in the blades. Of course, every now and then you're gonna take some hits from it. If you can, dodge roll through. If nothing else, get out of them quickly. Follow the general pace of your group. If your tank is wanting to kill every spider pack along the way, then follow the tank's lead. Or if the tank is doing a big pull up to the boss, then still follow their lead with how they are wanting to handle the spiders. The big thing is build ultimate, don't spend it on these little spiders. Alright, and your tank is gonna go and introduce themselves to the spider and get the pull started, and we're waiting back here on the pylon. While we wait for the boss to approach, we can pre-buff, we can lay down ground damage, start applying dots, and then once the boss is vulnerable, throw your ultimates and spammables. And then we get to the second pylon location, and again, spam on the boss as much as we can so that we only have to do 2 pylons. Spider always going to become vulnerable at the pylon so long as somebody pulls the lever to activate the lightning, which is what debuffs him. And if you don't see anyone else is pulling the pylon, please pull the pylon. Alright, now for the more interesting trash pulls. As we discussed in the tank point of view, there are a couple different types of enemies. There are the Mega Man hands, and then there's the melee enemies. The ones that have Mega Man hands, or are called capacitors, as a ranged damage dealer, such as an arcanist or a heavy attack build, focus those capacitors first because they're not going to stack in group nicely, especially if you only have one tank, and it can be more challenging, and those usually end up being the last thing to die anyway. So focus your damage on those first as a ranged damage dealer, and if you're melee, just stick with your tank and hit whatever you can. Again, just let your tank set the pace and follow their lead. And if you see any of these spheres channeling, give them a bash. And on these trash pulls, don't be afraid to use your ultimates. Use your ultimates freely, because trash pulls are what take the longest in Halls of Fabrication at this point. Now for the triplets boss. Big thing on the triplets boss is the boss in the middle is going to have a lightning AoE around him. Make sure that you do not touch that. Even on normal, it'll kill you, like you just saw there with that ally. Don't touch the lightning guy in the middle. You want to keep the damage on the 3 different bosses even. In this situation, our tank did not block the heavies from the side bosses, so they both got loose. In that case, just do your best to survive until your tank is back up. If you are not being actively chased by the boss, catch resurrections, especially your tanks. And these black puddles of grabby hands around the room, don't step in them. They will damage you and stun you. Biggest thing is don't panic. Resurrect your friends unless you're actively being chased by the boss. Alright, now for more trash pulls. The biggest thing is do not fight in the lightning water. It is going to drain your magicka and also damage you. Same as you wouldn't fight in the middle of the lightning going across the walkway. You move through it as quickly as you can and then just navigate on through. And as always on these trash pulls, just let your tank set the pace for whatever speed they are comfortable with moving through this trial. They want to do big pulls, let them do big pulls. They want to do a couple here and there, just follow their lead. And for the last boss, because we did not have a second tank and neither the healers volunteered, I offered to take the left arm position. Normally this would be a healer or the off tank, but in this situation somebody needed to go up there. Nobody else was offering, so I helped out. But most of the time damage dealers go on the right arm whenever you're looking at the boss, right or the firearm. The blade arm is normally handled by a healer or a tank. And whenever you walk up using this going behind the boss method, it is important that you do not touch the lightning puddle. And if you notice, our tank is not getting close enough. So if you are tanking this, it is very important that you stay close enough to the boss so that you do not get those jumps. Because once his arms break off, you need to get off the upper platform because it now is electrified. So as soon as the boss leaves the end of the trench, both of his arms have blown off, and he starts walking towards the middle. Number 1, stop damaging him. Number 2, step off that platform or step off the ledge and down into the trench because that ledge is now electrified. And the order of the boss is always going to be the same. It's not random which one he's going to go to. And as a damage dealer, when the boss goes to the middle of the room, you should be focusing killing Protectrons. Do not hit the boss when he's in the middle of the room. You will get a damage called feedback, and anything you deal to him will be more to you back. And on this last portion, try to hold your ultimates until the boss goes to the center. This last time whenever he goes to the center, after 25%, this is where you can damage him in the middle. If you notice, he's just standing here. He's not doing that charging animation. Just stay loose stacked with your allies. So if you saw there, I had 3 people standing on top of me. So find yourself a spot where you aren't specifically stacked on top of your friends and loose stack. And there, because people did not properly loose stack, we actually wiped, and you can fail that last 10%. Find yourself a spot around the boss's feet, but don't stack on each other. Just give a loose stack and damage your heart out. Trust your healers are going to heal you through it. But if there's 4 meteors, there's not a whole lot they can heal through. And a fun little trick is that you can actually resurrect them from down below. And with that, that concludes covering the different points of view of running Halls of Fabrication. I hope those of you that were looking for a little bit of an intro into this trial aren't too intimidated by this potentially daunting trial. I find it really fun. But with that, we are going to conclude today's video. Thank you all so much for joining me today. If you liked the video, make sure to throw a like and consider subscribing so that you know whenever the next one goes live. And if you want to hang out with us live, we're over on Twitch multiple days a week, so you can catch us over there. If nothing else, thank you all so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye!